Astro Bot is not only an essential game for the PS5, but an essential reason to own a PS5. If you thought Astro's Playroom was a showcase for the possibilities of the DualSense and the console, well, that was just the beginning. Goodbye, the show where I tell you about a thing and whether or not you should actually buy that thing. Today, that thing is the return of PlayStation's cute little mascot. Not that one. Nope, I'm talking about Astro Bot. Your expectations for Astro Bot are probably wrong, and that's not your fault. It goes for everyone, including myself. I expected a fun, silly, cartoon platformer that would feel like an extension of Astro's Playroom, where the joy would be in funny rumbles in the DualSense controller and pointing at the screen saying, "Look, Nathan Drake." In reality, this might just be one of the greatest platformers, like, ever. That just so happens to also have Nathan Drake and a bunch of other PlayStation mascots in it. The creativity, consistency, and cleverness are on another level compared to the safe, somewhat shallow platformers we often get nowadays. One big achievement, and something that I really wasn't expecting, is that you'll often find yourself forgetting about all of the PlayStation stuff going on while you're playing. Sure, there are a ton of classic callbacks and some niche characters you might be pleasantly surprised to see, but even without the Kratos and Bloodborne costumes, the game would be as equally brilliant as it already is. The nostalgia plays a big part, there's no denying that. Whether it ekes your excitement or puts you off a little bit, it's by no means a pillar of the game. And Astro Bot stands on its own two little robot feet as a PlayStation 5 game people will be playing and replaying just for the sheer joy in the experience. I feared it would be a bit of an advert for PlayStation dressed up as a video game. Sony's own Pepsi Man here for the memes and little else. But even when Astro Bot leans into this side of the series, it's genius. One level has you transform into Kratos, Leviathan X and everything, solving puzzles and freeing the likes of Thor and Freya from their snowy perils. When you become Drake, you get a little gun for a completely fresh style of level that sees you find hidden relics and climbing trees or shooting pirate skeletons to save Sully and Sam. It takes you through deserts, across volcanoes, inside dojos, to outer space, up mountains, down rivers, and both visually and mechanically offers something new every time that always hits the mark. Bosses appear at the end of each cluster of levels, and randomly in the middle, always with a new way of attacking that forces you to use powers in new ways, and experience the level in a fresh light. Platformers used to be this bold, and seem to shed that personality in favour of retreading safe old ground. But despite being a museum to Sony's past, Astro Bot is more concerned with looking forward, not backwards. If Astro Bot has a failing, and that's a big if, it may be in the enemy design. There are only a handful of baddies to bash aside from the bosses, and while they get a little tougher with tweaks to their attacks, this is one area where it risks growing stale. Still, Team Asobi may argue its smaller complement of baddies that grow in complexity are what keep it consistent. It's a play straight out of Mario's book, and in the platforming world, the plumber is still the king even as a new pretender climbs to the summit. These occasionally repetitive enemies are also an important part of Astro Bot's difficulty. The main levels are never too tough. The real challenge is finding all the bots and collectibles, but there are challenge levels as well. These have no checkpoints, so they're not for the faint of heart, yet they never fall into the trap that so many platformers do of cranking the difficulty up way beyond reasonable levels and changing the game's essence. Astro Bot can be punishingly difficult, especially the final gauntlet once you have every collectible in hand, but it never feels unfair. It can be tough to critically gauge how good a platformer is sometimes. With the exception of the truly bad ones, most of them achieve a decent baseline level of fun, because fun is all they're going for. You can enjoy them in the moment, and it's not until afterwards you realize it's just an empty sugar high, but Astro Bot is not that. Astro Bot is the best platformer we've had since Super Mario Odyssey, and honestly goes beyond that in almost every capacity. It firmly sits as a contender for the all-time crown in a genre that has felt a little neglected in recent years, especially by Sony, who once nurtured it to greatness. It's so much more than a PlayStation history lesson, and in climbing above those expectations, it becomes a piece of PlayStation history in its own right. With Astro Bot, the PS5 may finally have arrived. So one of the biggest things with any game is cost and the game's length. Value versus worth. Time versus investment. Bang versus buck. Something like that anyway. Astro Bot isn't really a cheap game. It's £60 on PS5 or £70 if you want some additional outfits and cosmetics that you can see here. It is a full-priced game, on par with those big games that come out of those big developers we know. And that's the thing, Astro Bot has been around for a while and is a big IP now. And it's coming from the PlayStation studio team Asobi, an undeniably big developer. The thing that imbues some hesitation is the genre. A platformer for £60? On one hand, there's valid consideration there. On the other, Nintendo has been doing it for years. Astro Bot is roughly 10 hours long, give or take depending on just how much time you want to spend playing around with cool mechanics and punching your favorite cameo characters. There are 5 worlds in total, each with their own number of levels within them, so there's plenty of variety and cool powers you'll be finding and utilizing depending on the specific level. If you're someone who wants to see, find, and do everything there is, however, then you can probably expect to spend closer to 20 or 25 hours playing the game. This includes finding all of the jigsaw pieces, all 300 bots, 169 of which are PlayStation mascots, and the 10 secret levels, which are not immediately obvious to find, and, as mentioned earlier, there are also the challenge levels to find and try your hand at as well. The length of the game is pretty standard for a platformer of this sort, and is on par with the likes of Super Mario Wonder, though a fair bit shorter than Odyssey when it comes to all of the 100% completion tasks. With all that in mind, it's worth the price, especially if you're someone who wants to go after all of the collectibles and secret levels. When combined with all of the DualSense utilization, inventive mechanics, and downright charm in everything that the game throws at you, it's an easy one to recommend any PS5 owner pick up. Astro Bot is not only an essential game for the PS5, but an essential reason to own a PS5. New and exciting games of this generation have been few and far between, with only a handful pushing any boundaries of graphical capabilities or the intuitive hardware we have available. Platforming is a genre we know well, whether from Nintendo or PlayStation's early days, and one that usually plays it safe when a new one comes along. The majority of modern platformers fall into the Metroidvania realm, or classic 2D Mario gameplay, while 3D entries like Mario Odyssey offer inventive new ideas to keep it fresh, and games like Yooka-Laylee and New Super Lucky's Tale are an ode to times gone by. Rarely do we get something like this, and rarer yet does it come from PlayStation. After being at the forefront of the inception of 3D platforming gaming, PlayStation has not held or been anywhere near that crown for a good 20 years. But with Astro Bot, we might be looking at something new to bring PlayStation back into a standout spotlight, being seen for something other than the story-heavy IPs we know so well. The plumber in red might still be the king of platforming with such a consistent history behind it, but Astro Bot is catching up, and with this game, might not be too far behind. Astro Bot is, without any semblance of a doubt, a good buy. If you own a PS5, play it. If you're interested in it, play it. If you're not interested in it, play it. If you don't have a PS5, well, you can't play it, and I won't say it's solely a reason to fork over £450 to get one, but it's a strong leader in the growing roster of PS5 games that makes the console's identity stand out, and makes owning one even more worth it.